Welcome to the Encouragement Engineering Podcast, where we combat the negativity that inundates our daily lives with positive perspective and positive action. Today's guest is Christian De la Huerta. With 30 years of experience, Christian is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and leading voice in the breathwork community. He has traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. An award-winning, critically acclaimed author, he has spoken at numerous universities and conferences and on the TEDx stages. His new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multi-Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as a balm for the soul of anyone searching for truth and answers to life's difficult questions. So please welcome to the show, Christian De la Huerta. Christian, thank you for your time today. Welcome to the show.
Bob, thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored and appreciate the opportunity. I like what you're up to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, if we can, let's go ahead and tell people how you got to where you are today, because what you're writing about, we'll get into that, and what's in your book and your beliefs and what you teach and things, really interesting. So how did you get to where you are?
That's a big question. It's been a long journey. You know, I was born in Cuba. I lived there my first 10 years of life in a communist regime. So I say that I'm an unlikely person to be writing about personal empowerment, because as probably most of your listeners know, in a totalitarian autocratic regime, power is very much hierarchical and power over, and the state pretty much owns you and owns everything about you and tells you what to do. So very few freedoms,
Right.
and so many freedoms that we take for granted here.
Well, and that's interesting you mention that, because I think as Americans, multi-generations away from that time of coming into this land with, like you said, you came when you were 10, you lived this, you understood what was going on. Many of us don't, that are Americans, and so I think that drive and that ambition of what you have is I appreciate it. I mean, my grandparents came over from Germany, and they strove and they digged and then they worked hard. So I understand, what you're saying. So thanks for doing that.
We know this country is a country of immigrants, and if there is anything exceptional about the United States, it is that we make up all of humanity. We're comprised of all of humanity in a beautiful, amazing, extraordinary way. And that is our potential. So anyway, and then I was also raised in a very Catholic environment. So another very hierarchical power over, being told what to do and what's wrong and everything about life. And when we came over from Cuba, when we emigrated to the US, we first lived in Georgia, in a small town, and I was the only one who spoke Spanish. I mean, who didn't speak English in my class. So it was pretty much sink or swim. And I was really shy, but I think just by nature, but also because my parents were involved in counter-revolutionary activities. So a lot of their friends were either jailed for 20 years or were shot. And so we were kind of raised with this implicit message of kind of hide and don't show up too much. And so I was so shy, Bob, that I was really good. I was a really good student. I had pretty much a 4.0 in high school, except for one B. And of course, I didn't set out to do this. But looking back on it, I know that I sabotaged my GPA so that I wouldn't have to get up in front of a room of hundreds and hundreds of people, an auditorium filled with people, and give the valedictorian speech. There's just no way that I was ready that I was ready to do that. And it's kind of lame looking back on it. And yet, it's my personal story adds credibility to what I write about, because through the teachings that I share in this book and the concepts and the principles that I live, these are not just hypothetical things that I picked up in a book or
Right.
we can, like, I live this way. I know that anything can be healed, and any fear, any obstacle can be overcome.
And that's a great message to kick things off with, is that idea that, any obstacle can be overcome. And like you said, as an immigrant, you understand that your parents strive for that. They wanted to make sure you understood that. My great grandparents and grandparents understood that. And then as generations go by, I think it gets a little bit depleted because we're here. But that work ethic, that striving, that overcoming obstacles is so critical in anything we do in life, because no matter what happens, things are going to happen to us anyway in our life.
Right.
And we've got to be able to overcome that. And it's interesting you mentioned, yeah, you kind of sabotage your grade point. We were all young and naive at one time, and we don't understand that value of what that could have been for us. But now you've been able to overcome that. I see you on podcasts all the time, on social media and things like that. So it seems like that's a thought that you've overcome.
I speak all over the world.
Yeah,
I've spoken, on TEDx
yeah,
stage, and so yeah, and I love the way you're talking about it, because I think what happens after several generations, we start getting comfortable,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
We no longer feel so different. We kind of get assimilated a little bit into mainstream America. And I love, because I was reading up on your work on your website, and I love that you use the metaphor of the hero's journey as well,
Yeah.
because I think that is what we get called out of. We get called out of this complacency, the sense of comfort in our lives, and we get the call, whether it's Neo getting the visit from Morpheus in the Matrix, or whatever the call is,
Right.
but it pops us out of that sense of comfort, and then we're launched into this adventure, which can be harrowing. And we meet ourselves, and we face our inner demons, and we have allies, and challenges that to overcome. And then once we overcome those with an expanded sense of self, and who we are, and all that wisdom, we return to the village, or to the tribe, or home, to share all that learned wisdom. So, and I love that you teach that as well, that you use that metaphor.
Well, and it's just such a, that's what we're here for. We're here for a journey. Okay, we can make the best of that journey and have fun with it, and adventure, and things are going to happen. We know that going into it. So we've got to be able to have a mindset that we can overcome it, that we can move through it, that we can adapt if we need to. And you have some interesting points in your book, Awakening the Soul of Power, that I wanted to touch on, because I think there's a critical one that talks about the mirror and the ego. And I've got to read this passage from it so everybody gets the idea. It says, in the model, the ego is featured with narrow slits for eyes, indicating that it has a hard time seeing what's right in front of it. With the mirror it holds in one hand, it sees clearly into the past and vividly remembers the past hurts and betrayals which it holds on to. The mirror is also looking good, since the ego is ego by definition is narcissistic. It's interesting you mentioned that, and I had to read that a couple times, because you think about it. Okay, it's got small slots or eyes, so it can't see a whole lot, even when something's right in front of it. But it's holding on to something. It's holding on to the past, betrayal, as well as its own ego. And guess what that does? That only leaves us with one hand. So now we're limiting ourselves by 50% by holding on to all that stuff. How do you help people to alleviate carrying those suitcases of baggage they carry around all the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's so important, because I spent probably the whole first quarter of the book, maybe the first third of the book, explaining what the ego mind is and how it works, because it is so critical. Like, if we want to be free, if we want to have relationships that have a chance at working, if we want to have a sense of personal empowerment, and to have lives that are filled with meaning and purpose, we've got to start by understanding what the ego mind is, and how it keeps us in a self-made prison of fear and lack and limitation. And there's so much to say about that. Like, I spend, in my weekend retreats, I spend hours talking about the ego. In my year-long coaching program, we spend the first quarter dedicated on like really getting how it works and its machinations and shenanigans, because it's so tricky. And so what the way that representation of the ego addresses is like how it has a really hard time being in the present.
Yeah.
We spend the majority of our time stuck in the past, rehashing a past that is gone and will never be again, or futurizing, fantasizing, hallucinating about a future that may or may not come to be.
Right.
And so the only thing that we know for sure is not a figment of our imaginations, that is not a memory or a fantasy, is the present moment. And we have a really hard time being in the present moment. And so that's that's one of the ways in which that mirror is used, that handheld mirror is like as a kind of a rear view mirror to the past. The other way that it uses it as a weapon is like it shoves it in other people's faces. You did this.
Yeah.
You did that, right? Like you always do this, you never do that, which is really easy. Anybody can do that, but to kind of flip that mirror around, to turn it around and face it upon ourselves and ask ourselves is like, well, how do I do that? And what was my role in it? And how did I get into the situation again? And what are these relationship patterns that sometimes have me feeling like I'm in the same boring play with a different actor?
Right.
It's like that is hard, and that is nothing short of heroism.
And that's a good perspective to look at it too, is we can't use that mirror just to show others their wrongs. You know, as you know, in the Bible, it states that, you know, take out the timber out of your eye before you pull out this, you know, the thing out of your friend's eye or your enemy's eye.
Exactly.
You know, it's hard to realize we're not perfect, which I don't have a problem admitting. I know I'm not. You know, I'm sometimes I'm a bull in a china shop or as blunt as a pickaxe. So it's, you know, it's just the way I am. I understand that it's not perfect, but also enjoy, like you said, enjoy that present moment. Things could be going haywire. Laugh at it. I think that's, you know, a great release to help with that situation. It's not always fun, but when you can laugh, that really changes the chemicals in your body and your mind so that you can enjoy the moment.
Yes, and I love that you say that. I think perfectionism is highly overrated.
A lot of work.
I know. And it's insatiable to the ego. There's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
Right. There's not enough of worldly success of anything. I can't be president of the U.S. because I'm naturalized, but if I could, that wouldn't be enough. You know, then I'd have to be, you know, president of North America, then the world, then the solar system, then the galaxy. It's never enough.
Yeah.
And the tragic part of that is that for those of us who are recovering perfectionists or maybe still active perfectionists, what's really going on underneath is that we're overcompensating for not feeling good enough. So we've got to go, you know, and that's kind of in the shadow. We're not aware of that consciously, but we have to overcompensate and go all the way to the other extreme and to prove to ourselves and to the world that we are worthy, that we are lovable, or whatever it is that we're trying to prove.
It's interesting you bring that up because I think of a time, and I've read this in several books about astronauts. You think about that, they've literally gone wherever they've gone in space, out of the atmosphere. You can't get much higher than that. And then they come back and there's a mindset shift that what are we going to do next? And they have to deal with that. And that's where a lot of them, you know, I'm sure they go through all kinds of personal growth or ups and downs about that idea of what do I do next when you've achieved such a high thing as like an astronaut? What do you do next? And, you know, how do you help people to get over that idea? Like you said, that being a perfectionist, what's the next thing that we realize we don't really need it? How do you help them with that?
Yeah, you know, it all stems going back to understanding how the ego mind works, because that's the part of us that doesn't feel sufficient, that feels like there's something wrong with us, that feels like there's something missing, that we're damaged goods, that, you know, whatever our interpretation of that constellation of beliefs, which none of them are true.
Right.
They're all misunderstandings from really, really young minds that didn't know any better. And we misheard something. We were told something in a moment of overwhelm, of reactivity, and we took it on as truth. We took it on as like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. Or maybe our parents got divorced and daddy left, and we took it on as like we had something to do with it. Like if it was our fault, didn't daddy love me enough?
Right.
Without taking into account, you know, what was going on in his mind, in her mind, what was going on in their relationship. There were so many factors that we don't know.
Right.
You know, brain biochemistry, substance abuse, the way they were raised, their expectations about about relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we made it about ourselves just because we didn't know any better.
Right.
And then we've been living most of our lives from that misunderstanding. And that has impacted all of our relationships. So how do we get out of that? For understanding how the mind works and doing whatever we got to do to build up like an authentic sense of who we are. The stronger our sense of self, the stronger our self-esteem, the less dependent that we become on any kind of external validation, and the less we care about what anybody else thinks.
And that's a great point, because I think we need to have that strength in our own life to know we are of great value. And no matter what others say, you know, it could be for, learning process. It could be for to help you, but knowing your value to begin with, knowing that, okay, I can take that criticism, not a problem, take it with your chin up and learn from it, adjust what you need to do and continue to grow, because you're building your greatness. And I think that's a great point you bring up. And you even mentioned that in the book, one of the lines in there, it says, a choice and personal responsibility are keys to freedom and keep us out of the prison of victimhood. We're not victims of anything. We can get through this. And I love that piece, that prison of victimhood. It locks you in. Don't let that lock you in. Tell us more about that.
Well, you just went for like the jugular, right?
Yeah.
You went for like the hardest, most heroic thing around all this, because it's most of us. I think the ego level of consciousness is stuck in this victim mode. Right. What life did to me. If only mom had done this, or dad had not done that, or the teacher or the minister or society or racism or sexism or homophobia, if it only wasn't for the family that I was born into, if I had been born rich, right? If only, as long as we're keeping or holding someone or something outside of ourselves responsible for our state of being, for our happiness, we just gave our power away, right? It's because of them, or because of that we're not fulfilling our potential, and that is ultimately disempowering.
It's like handing over the keys to your car. You're not going to drive it,
It's much more than that. The key to your life.
Yeah. And why would you do that? Your life is so valuable. There's going to be trials and tribulations, but that's your path. That's your adventure. Think of it as an adventure. I think people need to realize life is an adventure.
Exactly. And so you mentioned the word choice. That simple word changes everything.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing we can count on is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way.
Yeah.
Right. And some of it is going to suck.
Yeah.
And some of it sucked in the past, and I wish it hadn't happened. But there it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't do a thing about that. And that's going to continue.
Yep.
But so what we can do something about is how we show up in response to that, right? How we show up in response to the curveballs. And even by putting in that one word, that simple word of choice, I get to choose how I'm going to be in response to this.
Right.
That pops us out of victim mode.
Gives you hope.
Exactly. And brings choice. We bring choice back into the equation. And it's empowering to do that.
And that's a great segue into the other thing that you talk about is power practices, overcoming ego, judgment, expectations. Notice your expectations and choose otherwise. Again, there's that choice. There's that choosing. You can, overcome that ego, the judgments, the expectations, what others want of you. Tell us more about that power practices. I think those are interesting because they're throughout the book there.
Yeah, one thing the way that I structure the book was I try to make it as interactive as possible. So, short chapters. Yeah. Because I know when I'm reading a book,
they are short. Some of them are short.
If I see this huge long chapter, it's like, oh my God, it's a little bit like, overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I broke it down into smaller, more manageable bite-sized pieces, and then made it as interactive as you can with a book.
Yeah.
by putting in power practices at the end of each chapter. So these are questions, these are exercises that are designed to take on these teachings so that they don't stay just at the level of, wow, what a great idea, what a great thought, but we actually apply them to our lives, because it's in doing that that transformation happens, and that it doesn't stay at the level of learning or understanding, but that our lives change and our relationships change, and the way we approach our relationship to power changes. And so that's where the reason that I designed the book that way, to make it as practical as possible.
And that's good, because like you said, it is a reminder, and it's right there. It's I think that word power practices, that's a great word. It's like thunderbolts reunite, or whatever that cartoon was that, they clicked their rings and everything lit up. It's showing people, you put this in practice, in the power of overcoming ego, of overcoming objection or judgment, or expectations of others. That is so empowering to people. Again, that gives them that hope, gives them that strategy, that as you read, you're like, wow, I can do that. And
Exactly.
it invigorates you to keep going and keep reading. There are times where it's like, okay, I got to stop because I do need some sleep. But as I was reading, I'm like, this is pretty cool. So I appreciate that, and I think a lot of people will get that out of the details in the book when they read it too, is, these things they can implement. And I think that's, a great job with that. You've done that with the pieces in the book, because of what it's saying. I think you need to reiterate that just another time so they can get that segment. So.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, not a problem. And it mentions too the power tools for healing the ego, and it says mindful self-observation, breath work, and meditation. Tell us about those three, if you would, because you mentioned in your bio about breath work. Tell us a little bit about that, because I know that there's some great benefits to that.
Yeah, well, yeah, those are the three practices that we can take on that will change our lives. Mm-hmm. So, self-observation is just paying attention to who we are and understanding who we are, why we do the things we do. And it's easy to go through life, kind of coasting and not looking at ourselves, just having fun. There's nothing wrong with that, except that we miss a huge opportunity. And we can kind of become stagnant and not grow. That level of freedom that we're talking about, that comes from it comes from being willing to take that heroic journey inside, right? And to explore that vast universe inside each one of us. And that takes work, right? And it takes facing our inner demons, our doubt, self-doubts, asking why we believe the things we do, looking at patterns of behaviors, and looking at relationship patterns. Why is it that we keep attracting the certain kind of people? Why do we sabotage our relationships and end up falling for, people who are not available, who are not a match, who live on the other side of the world? It's like, so it's the rewards of that inner journey are infinite. And it could probably be summarized in one word, which is freedom, like real ultimate freedom. And yet, it's not an easy journey. That's why, this first book is the first of a series of three titled Calling All Heroes. What does it mean to live a heroic life in the 21st century? Right. And so that first step is self-awareness, knowing who we are. Like they used to put that on the entries to temples in the old days, know thyself. Right. And it's almost a cliche to say that if you really want to love someone else or be loved, you have to love yourself first. And the only way that's going to happen is if you really know yourself. So there's no way around that. Meditation is another aspect of that. It's a practice for self-observation. And most of the time when we sit in meditation, even if it's 10 minutes, counting our breath, observing our breath, most of the time it's going to be boring, right? There it is, looking at my breath, watching my breath, and then there I go doing my shopping list or my to-do list, or, bring myself back to the breath or to the mantra or whatever. There I go, thinking about the argument I had with my spouse yesterday, back to the breath. Or then futurizing about what I'm going to tell my boss when I go to the office next, right? Back to the breath. once in a while, we have these amazing moments of connectedness and bliss and inner peace and a quiet mind. But the benefit of doing that meditation practice, because that's what it is, right? It's like we're practicing dribbling so that we can play a basketball game. So we got, or practicing piano chords so that we can play a concert one day. And so that the benefit of doing that, of that self-observation and watching ourselves and bringing us back to present, is that when the rubber hits the road and we're about to get into that argument and we're about to go over the waterfall and say something or do something that we're then going to regret.
Yeah.
Like we're
That's never happened.
Reaction and regret cycle.
Yeah.
That's when that practice comes in. And all we need is that moment, right? Just that moment of awareness to bring a choice. Ooh, ouch, that one hurt. How do I want to respond to that?
Right.
So that I pop out of this merry-go-round of they do this, I do that. Boring. Yeah. We've done that 1,000 times.
It's an interesting analogy, a merry-go-round of this argumentative scene. So,
but isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's around and around, the same thing.
Same old crap.
Yeah. And,
same old crap.
Wow. And it is hard to do that because our society is a microwave society in a crock pot world. We want to go everything at 90 miles a minute. And it's, we need to stop. And I think the meditation, the mindful self-observation, we need to understand it takes time. That is not something we're going to do over 2 hours or 10 minutes. Like you said, a practice, continue 10 minutes daily, maybe twice a day if you need to. It's the same thing with exercise. We're not going to get fit in a day. We've got to continue that pattern. So what about with the breath work? That one interests me.
Yeah, the breath, it's a huge conversation too, because there's so many different breathing practices and techniques that we can use for different purposes. So there's certain types of breathing practices or breathing techniques that we can use to, like, for example, slow down, deepen the breath, to become more conscious of our breath, that are great for stress management, to help ourselves fall asleep, for relaxation, for becoming more present, all that kind of things. There are other types of breath, like the yoga breath of fire or the cleansing breath, that are like more energetic and they're faster and they're more like a clip. And so those are good. I wouldn't do those right before bedtime, but they're great to do like right before a podcast interview. I was running a little bit of energy because I had just had lunch. Yeah. And so rather than reach for the coffees, like I did my fast breathing practices and boom, come out of it really energized and present and focused. The breath work that I'm talking about there, it's a different type of practice. You do it for a longer period of time. You do it for about an hour 15, an hour and a half. And it's a circular connected breath. And Bob is like, I can't tell you how powerful it is. My degree's in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist. I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. And with all due respect to that tradition, when I discovered breath work, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and heals so profoundly at so many levels. And part of the reason, and without, I'm not dissing therapy. In the right hands, with clear goals, it can be profoundly healing and helpful. And we all know you can sit on somebody's couch for 10, 20, 30 years, because I know it because they come to me, and nothing happens. Right? Because understanding what happened to us when we were 5 or 10 or 15 is good, and it certainly beats not knowing. But the problem with that is that trauma has now been somaticized and it now lives in the body. So no amount of talking about it is going to really clear it and get to it. And so the beauty of the breath, the miracle, for lack of another word, of using breath work is that it bypasses the mind and it goes to the source of that trauma, which now lives in the body at the tissue level, and it clears it. Wow. And I know this sounds too good to be true. Like to my scientific, logical, skeptical part of me, this sounds too good to be true, even though I can't argue with 30 years of results and witnessing and experiencing dramatic healings and transformation. And I'm talking about people that I've worked with who have been survivors of sexual abuse and all sorts of abuse, and survived violent crime and stuff like that, and it gets healed.
Yeah.
it really gets healed.
That's you bring up a good point there, is because that trauma gets integrated into our body. It isn't, taken out. And so you've got to get that oxygenation gets into the cellular level, gets into your brain, your tissue. Like you said, talking about it doesn't get to the tissues. It may help your heart a little bit to understand it and adjust and learn about it. But like you said, that getting that breath, that air and oxygen into those physical parts of your body is very critical. And that's a known fact that will help. Like you said, right before this, to get energized, you can do breathing exercises, because same thing with a run or a workout, that will oxygenate your blood, get you, it will change your mindset. So you're more focused, you're clear, you're ready to go. And you don't have to worry about the caffeine.
Exactly. And what used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy, now we know from physics, from quantum physics, that it's true.
Yeah.
Everything is energy.
Yeah.
That means the body is energy. That means that our emotions are energy. And the thing about energy that we also know from physics is that it cannot be destroyed. It can only change forms.
Right.
So when we think about all the times that we have stuffed our emotions, especially guys, since we were kids, we were told little boys don't cry because somehow somebody along the way decided that the emotions were a sign of weakness.
Right.
How did they come up with that?
Yeah.
Right? Emotions are not weak, they're not strong, they're not good, they're not bad, they're just energy. They're energies moving through our bodies. What we do with them, depending on what we do with them and how we express them, depends on whether we have a result in a good or a bad effect.
Right.
But the thing is that, so when we stuff our energies, our emotional energies, they don't just go away.
Right.
They get stuck in the tissues of our body. And only two things can happen, right? We suppress it, we suppress it, and then the next unfortunate one comes and rubs us the wrong way, and we explode inappropriately, like a volcanic eruption, completely overreacting to that particular situation, and we cause harm in our relationships.
Yeah.
Or that energy has to come out one way or the other. It's going to start seeping out through the body in bodily symptoms, cancer, ulcers, heart attacks. So, when I think about the emotions, to learn what we're feeling and to then have the courage and the wisdom to express those emotions responsibly, courageously, in a way that they can be heard, not just dumping them on somebody else, like or having a tantrum like a two-year-old. That is the stuff of mastery. So it's the opposite of weakness.
Well, it's education. You get a chance you learn processes and procedures to put in place, so when this occurs, you can do it in a decent manner that helps you and the other person, and you still can have a communication level. I think that's very, very important for our society. We need to learn how to respond and not just react to everything. Stop, think, listen, learn it, adapt to it if it affects you or doesn't, and then make a decision and move on and respond accordingly. You don't react. A knee-jerk reaction is never good.
And by the way, for the guys listening, the audience, this is like extra critical for us, because I talk about the differential in power, and how it's really important that for all of us that women become 50% in power. Because to that, we can connect all the other issues that we face as a species. It's not to idealize women, it's not to put them up on a pedestal. Women are also capable of abusing power. And it's not to add more stuff for them to clean up and more responsibility for women. It's because we've been running off kilter. And that doesn't work. And everybody pays a price. So let's look at men. And so this system of power over, this hierarchical power structure that requires for me to push somebody else down, step on them, put my knee to their neck in order for me to feel powerful, doesn't work for anybody.
No.
Right? Of course, it doesn't work for women, and women have been oppressed for far too long, and enough of that, and it also doesn't work for men. So let's look at the numbers. The longevity. Women in this country outlive men by 5 years. Globally, by 7 years.
Wow.
Suicide.
Yeah.
Like men in this country commit suicide at 4 times as frequently as women do. 70% of the suicides in this country are committed by middle-aged white men.
Wow.
So what's up with that, right? The system isn't working for men either. Right. And part of that is what we're talking about, is because we've gotten this twisted understanding and belief about what it means to be a man, and we walk around like robots, not feeling, because that's weakness. And that doesn't work.
No.
For anybody.
Yeah, like you said, that's, you know, the pain people carry, you don't need to carry it. You know, it's, you know, understand that, and thank you for that reminder. So now, where can Christian, where can people find out more about you, your book, you know, your engagements? Tell us more about that, where they can get a hold of you.
Thanks so much for asking that, Bob. The book is available, you know, wherever books are sold, Amazon and your local bookstore. If you want to support your local bookstore, it just means you need to order, and it'll take a little bit longer, but no big deal. Yeah. In terms of reaching me, probably the best way is to go to my website, and from there they can access my social media. My website is soulfulpower.com. And right now we've got, right now that I'm doing a lot of podcasts, we've got this offer going on that if they sign up to be on our email list, we'll send them a sample chapter of the book, some of the power practices that you were talking about, and a recorded guided meditation on trust.
Oh, wow. Great. Okay. Yeah. Great. And we'll put all that in the show notes, because that's critical information for everybody. You got a great concept. It's refreshing to know that, you know, we as people, we're okay. We've got learning to do, and that's great. And we can accomplish that learning, and we don't have to carry all this stuff, like you said, that society has led us to carry, you know, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Most of the time it's not good. So why are we doing it? You know, keep asking that question, why? And I've heard this many times, is continue to ask it at least 5 to 7 times. Why? And you'll really get down to that true answer. And that's where you'll feel that pain, feel that feeling, and that emotion come out of why you are doing something or why you want to do something. So
I love
thanks for that reminder.
Yeah, and thanks for that, because be willing to ask why. Then if you land on the same...
On the Encouraging Engineering podcast, I really appreciate what you're offering in your book, what you do. It's a true enlightenment into our society. So thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Bob. I loved our conversation, and thanks for everything that you do on all our behalf. I know that your work reaches a lot of people, so thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You. Have a good day then.
You too. Belief or the same practice or the same choice, then great. But at least you went through the process of questioning why you do the things you do and why you believe the things you do.
Yeah. Well, Christian, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for being a guest